Today's routed world, understanding routing in the current generation. Well, welcome to CBT Nuggets BSCI video series. Whether you're here for certification purposes and looking to pick up that CCNP, or whether you're here to just add a ton of routing skill to your tool belt and your experience for the on-the-job placement, this series I think you're gonna really enjoy. My name is Jeremy Chara. I am a CBT Nuggets trainer and have been doing training for going on 11 years. I've been focused in the Cisco world for about 8 of those 11 years and really focused in on IP telephony, but I'll tell you what, my true passion is still here in the routing and switching world. So what we're going to do in this opening video is to go through, first off, what this series is all about, what you can expect to learn by the time you're done with the BSCI video series. Second, we'll look at the current CCNP certification track from Cisco. For those of you that are interested in certification, I'll go over what the tests look like nowadays, because if it's been a little bit since you've taken a Cisco certification exam, boy, are they different. And boy, are they tough. They've become much more difficult, and in a good way. They're much more real world. And then finally, I'll give you a flyby view of today's routed world before we get into the nitty-gritty details and walk through the rest of the series. The Building Scalable Cisco Internetwork series, at its core, is all about routing. You are going to immerse yourself into routing protocols in the depth that you really need for a modern, large, or enterprise class network. Now, coming from the CCNA environment, you got some experience with routing protocols. You know how to set up RIP, EIGRP, and even in the new CCNA, now they're talking about OSPF, and you get some OSPF experience as well. But it's always just the tip of the iceberg. That's what I like to think of the CCNA as. It's a great certification because what it does is sort of take mountains of technology, all these mountains that Cisco has of switching and routing and even a little bit of security in the CCNA. And it kind of does this, right across the top of all those mountains and sort of clips off the tip of the iceberg, which is fun because you get to just get a little piece of everything, but nothing in all of its depth. So what this CCNP certification track is designed to do is take you down the mountains, to take you down each one of those mountains of technology, BSCI being specifically geared towards routing. We're going to take a look at every single one of these routing protocols that you see on the screen. EIGRP, everything about it. OSPF, everything about it. You're going to see, in-depth, nitty-gritty debugs. You're going to see setup. You're going to see multi-area configuration, summarization, everything that you can do. I got to be careful with those statements. Almost everything you can do with OSPF in a production network. We'll even look at some protocols that didn't come up in CCNA, and that is ISIS and BGP. ISIS is actually the protocol of choice for many service provider environments because it has the ability to scale larger than any other routing protocol out there, with the exception of BGP. BGP being the protocol of the internet that ties all of the networks around the world together. That is my favorite protocol, even though it's the worst one on the planet. It's designed to be slow. It is my favorite protocol because of all the options and tunability that you get with it. That, I'm telling you, that's going to be an exciting part of this series. We'll also get into multicast, which is a topic that sort of is important in the IP version 4 world. It's, it comes up here and there. You hear this term of multicast and how great it's going to be, but really it's going to be huge in TCP/IP version 6, which happens to be the final topic of this series. TCP/IP version 6 is, I don't mean to sound over enthusiastic about all this stuff, but it's going to be great. It's been out for a good decade. I mean, people have been hearing about it and, oh, it's coming someday and someday we'll see it and all of this. Well, guess what? It's here. It is here in many places, especially outside the United States, and it's becoming more and more popular. As the years go on, I'm even tempted, to back off and say as the months go on, you're going to see more and more and more of this protocol. So why not get started learning what the foundations are, how the addressing is going to work, what subnetting is going to look like? You mean subnetting didn't go away? That's right, we still have subnetting. So we'll take a look at TCP/IP version 6, essentially the foundations. You're going to be able to set up your Cisco routers to run TCP/IP version 6, and we'll even throw OSPF in there to where we'll be able to set up routing using OSPF version 3, which is the one geared for TCP/IP version 6. Now, I know many of you are here for certification reasons, meaning you are looking to pass the Cisco BSCI exam. Well, as I mentioned at the very beginning, much has changed in the CCNP series from the tests of years ago. The tests have now become very real world, which has me excited. Because if there's one thing I hate, it's teaching to kind of a test environment, meaning this is let me give you an example of teaching for a test environment. Okay, we've got some bullet points here, and you won't really need to know these for the real world, but here's what you need to do: highlight this, and highlight this. You'll want to memorize those facts because they're going to drill you on the exam. What's that all about? Why on earth would you memorize facts that you're never going to find useful in the real world just to pass a test? And that leads me to the next point. Why on earth would you have a test that is asking you questions on things you'll never use in the real world? That's what Cisco said, and that's why they revised the entire CCNP track. I'm going to take you to that URL that's on the screen right now, which is the kind of the source of all things certification in the Cisco world. I'm going to jump over here, and you can see this is when you go to that certification links, it'll redirect you to this page, which shows you every major certification track that Cisco has. Everything beginning with the CCNA. Now, BSCI is part of the CCNP track and also bleeds over into the CCIP track. But when you click on CCNP, you see the 4 exams, BSCI, BCMSN, ISCW, and ONT, that makes CCNP certification possible. Now, like I was saying, Cisco has revised their exams to be very real world. And if you look, and if you just choose the BSCI right here on the exam, this is everybody, always wonders, where do I get information about the exam? This is the best place for it right here. You have the test number that you want to register with Sylvan Prometric or View. Those are the 2 major testing companies that you can see right here. You have the length of the exam, the certifications that it applies to, the exam policy and requirements and all of that sort of stuff. You've got, going down the description, right below, every single topic that is on the exam is listed in bullet point format. Now, of course, those bullet points aren't like, know how to change the host name of a router. It's more of like explain functions and operations of EIGRP. Whoa, that's a big concept. Configure EIGRP routing and everything that goes with that. So these are really umbrella topics. And whenever I'm preparing to take a certification exam, I'm, by the way, a certification monkey. I love getting certifications. It's just, I don't know, that's what I do. So I always print out the exam objectives and keep them by my side. And as I study for them and prepare for them, I just run a little highlighter over each one. Once I feel confident in an area, highlight it. It's good to go. I'm ready in that section. So you'll find that as you walk through the CBT Nuggets video series, you will find all of the topics that line up to what you find in this outline. And of course, this is my favorite part, prepare you for the real world. As I mentioned, there's nothing I detest more than just talking about certifications in the sense of, oh, prepare for this, you'll never really use it. And that's the great thing about Cisco certification. Everything that I talk about in this course is going to be so geared towards the real world. You're going to see constant live demonstrations of setting stuff up. You're going to see constant demonstrations of here's how you apply this. And what if that goes wrong? Here's how you troubleshoot it. Here's some show commands. Let's do debugs. I mean, everything just like you were setting this up in a live environment, because that is what you'll see if you take the certification exam. The fluff has really been removed. Now, I'm not going to say you're never going to get a question where you're like, oh, come on, that's a fact memorization. Sure, those are still there. But overall, the questions are very real world. And what I wanted to do is take you through the certification exam tutorial. If you haven't seen this before, this is what the new Cisco certification exams look like. It shows the different styles and formats of the questions that you have in this environment. And this happens to be the same simulation that you go through when you go start a Cisco certification exam. Let me see if I can center it here. Shows every single type of question. Now, my advice is when you go take the exam, even if you've seen it before, go through this tutorial. Because half of the battle when you're taking a certification exam is not whether or not you know the knowledge, it's your own nerves. You're kind of nervous, you're kind of shaky, you know. Even me, I've taken tons of these exams, but I still go through this tutorial because it just lets me breathe for a moment before the clock is ticking and I'm on question number 1. So first off, you're going to see on the exam the standard multiple choice. They still haven't gone away. And I would say there's still the majority of your questions. And I hesitate on that. I would say they're about 50% of your questions. Just choose the answer, hit next. Now, and it will, you know, tell you if you've chosen too few. Now, this is a revision that has happened fairly recently in the Cisco world. All of the select all that apply questions are gone. And that is good news because all of them will say choose 2 or choose 3 or choose the best 4. So you'll know exactly how many answers to select from this list. Now you might be thinking, by the way, I know those answers aren't right. You're probably thinking, what are you thinking? Google's not an operating system. But the point is that if you've ever had a select all that apply question, you know your mind can mess with you. You'll be sitting there going, okay, those are the 2, and then you'll see the third and be like, well, maybe if they were thinking this way, that would be a right answer. Well, how were they thinking? And then you start freaking out, playing your own mind games because you're like, I don't know how many are right. So all the select all that apply questions have become choose 2, choose 3. That is a huge step forward for at least your mental sanity. You also have drag and drop questions where you get to drag and drop all of the different routed and routing protocols in the right place. Sometimes you'll be able to use these answers twice. Sometimes you won't use them at all. I'm just glancing at these as I'm talking. So anyway, yeah, we've got all of these different routing and routed protocols that we have. But the point of this question is that not all questions on the exam are created equal. There is partial credit given for some of the questions on the exam. So if you get some of the answers correct, you will get partial credit. And there are also questions that are worth more than others. You will see some questions that have a heavier weighting. For example, some of the simulations, which we'll talk about in a moment, have more points associated with them if you get them correct than a standard multiple choice question. Now you'll see this, and this is what makes me laugh. You'll see this when you start the exam. They will also mention that some questions will be worth no points at all. Now, will you ever know what those questions are? Will you ever know, oh, that's a 0-point question? No. It's probably some new question that they're trying out just to see how people do on it. Just, a beta test sort of question that they've put into the exam. But you'll never really know what questions are worth what. So answer them all to the best of your ability and hit the next. Oh, by the way, this is very real world as well. There is no previous button on Cisco exams. It's either next or next. Once you answer a question, you cannot come back to it. You cannot skip it. So, these kind of questions, for the most part, on Cisco exams are gone. And I shouldn't even say for the most part, because they are gone. All of the fill-in-the-blank questions have been replaced by the simulation. You used to have to remember what commands. You'd say, what command to do this? And you type it in on the old exams. Now, all of those have been transitioned into simulations, which this is what they look like. Now, I will warn you, beware. That is the exact font size that you have on the certification exam. The font is pretty small. But up top, you see your scenario. You can scroll up, scroll down in this little box right here that shows you what you are to do on the router. And then down here, they'll usually have like a bullet points of objectives. Like this one says, change the host name of lab A to router A. Now down here is your topology, which you can come back to plenty of times, and all of your devices. Now the first time I saw these simulation style questions, I was like, oh, well, I need to, change lab A. So I'm clicking on lab A like, come on, where's my prompt? The computer with the dotted line represents a console cable, and you'll never see a simulation question that is this easy. Change the host name of lab A to router A. I can guarantee you that. They're always, I shouldn't say always, but they're usually very, what's the word to use? Very trying, very testing of your knowledge without just asking you, change an IP address or change a host name. For example, let me make this question a little more stylistic. Let's say you're on the CCNA exam. They may say change the host name of lab C to router C. And you notice that you only have a console connection to router A and there's no IP addresses on the routers. So you come up to router A and what you would end up having to do is use CDP, the Cisco Discovery Protocol, to start discovering the neighbor IP addresses, telnetting to those routers, getting into those until you telnet all the way over to router C, and then you're able to change the host name over there. They will always tell you any passwords that you need during the simulation, but the cool news is everything works. Shortcuts work. The tab key now works. That's a new improvement to the lab. So you can hit tab to finish a partially typed command. The question mark works to where you can use context-sensitive help during the simulation. The save commands work. I mean, it's like being on a real router. The only thing to tell you if you're going in the wrong direction, and you really have to be going in the wrong direction for this to pop up, is you'll see a message during the simulation, that command is not supported in this simulation. So if you see that, that's not the right way to go. See if you can do it another way. Now, a lot of people when they get into these simulations get a little nervous because when you first sit down and do it and you type, you mistype a command, it's like invalid command. Immediately you're like, oh no, I lost points. No, you start really getting bothered. Or if I use the question mark, it's like, is this deducting points because I'm using the question mark so often? The answer to all those questions is no. Thankfully, the grading engine of the simulation is very simple. It does not grade you until you hit that next button, until you've got, everything set up the way you want it and you hit next. So you could type in a million things wrong, but as long as you've typed in the key commands that Cisco is looking for, when you hit the next button, it will just say, did you type these commands? That also goes for if you over configure the router. I mean, you might be looking at that, like typing commands and be like, well, in addition to the objectives they've asked me, Cisco's best practice says that I should secure the console port. I noticed there was no password and I should set the enable secret and I should, you go through all this stuff. I'll tell you this, you could configure a worldwide network in that simulator. But when you hit the next button, the only thing it's looking for is, did you change the host name of lab A to router A? Did you type in host name router A from global configuration mode? You could have everything else, and it's not going to deduct you for that. It's going to be like, hey, great, you did the best practices, but I was just looking for that one command. So you can feel at ease in the simulation knowing that you can over-configure the router and still be okay. So the last style of question is my least favorite. I hate these kind of questions. They call them testlets. What they are multiple questions in one. And the reason I don't like these kind of questions is because they really throw off my gauge of time. Like I think I'll be all right doing okay on my time on the exam. And then I get one of these and I'm like, oh, because these questions are like 4 questions inside of one. Up top, you'll have a scenario. Or sometimes you'll have a simulation up there. And down below will be 1, 2, 3, and at least in this one, 4 different questions on that scenario or that simulation. If it's just the story problem, kind of like this, where you can kind of see, the story up top, some ping results right here, and testing and so on, and you can answer questions about the story like what's wrong, it'll be this style. If it's a simulation up here, they may be asking questions about the network environment, like, what IP address does this router have? And you have to go use show commands to see what the IP address is. Or is router C properly configured to, do whatever, and you go figure it out based on your verification. So that's a fun question type, I'll tell you that. But that one is the final type of question that you can have on the Cisco certification exam. So hopefully that gives you a good idea of what the new CCNP, and actually all Cisco exams are moving to that style. All of the exams have become difficult and they've gotten very real world in their practice and in their question types. But if you have any other thoughts or questions on that, feel free to go to that URL. It will usually have the answers to just about anything that you could ask. The last thing that we'll talk about before we get into the series itself is what today's routed world looks like. It's not the network of yesteryear. Today, all types of devices are coming to one communication medium. The cable networks, the phone networks, the video networks, the data networks are all merging into this big blob we call the network. Some people call it the internet. But the networks have become increasingly more and more complex over the years because of advances like wireless connectivity. We've got IP telephony that has totally reshaped security for the network. For example, you see right up here on this diagram, this phone that's sitting on the network. Well, there's all kinds of security concerns because if you let that be on the same subnet as these devices right here, there's already programs free that you can download that allow you to essentially tap the line of those IP phones. So you can record the conversations kind of like you used to do, not like you used to do, but some people used to do with the butt sets back in the day of just normal PBXs. Well, PBXs, I always say back in the day, but you know, when we had traditional phone equipment and you just clipped onto the wire. So it's become even more convenient for the intruders now to get into that world. So we have routing that separates the IP phone from the computer, and we have routing that goes to different firewalls. We have routing that separates internet modules to where the internet module comes in and is filtered before it gets to the network. We have routing in our layer 3 switches that goes between VLANs and protecting the servers, routing to the branch offices, routing across frame relay and private networks that we have tying our enterprise together, MPLS networks. All of these things are tied together through routing and the routing protocols. So as we get into this series, I want you to envision a larger world than we used to have. A world where all kinds of routers are all over the place needing to communicate, and that's just within an organization. We're going to see multiple routing protocols at the same time running in an organization, how we can exchange routes between them, how we can filter routes. All of these are needs in today's routed world. All of these different goals that you're going to learn are useful somewhere. Sure, you're not going to be able to take every single thing we talk about in this series right back to your job and say, yep, that's what we're going to do. We're going to set up ISIS across the network. But if you stay in the Cisco world long enough, I guarantee you, at some point, you'll run into the ISIS routing protocol. You'll run into BGP and have a need to implement it. And that's where you can come back to this series and go, now I can grab that nugget and that piece of information to apply directly. I'm hoping now you have a good idea of where this series is going. It is going to be preparing you for the real world, setting this stuff up on Cisco routers, and in doing so, you'll also be prepared for the certification exam. So you'll forgive me if, as you go through this series, you will never hear me say, prepare for this because it's on the exam, because just about everything that you see here is a potential that you could find there. It is setting up Cisco routing in the real world. Finally, we took a look at what today's routed world looks like. You can see it's much more complex than it used to be. So some of the tools that you're going to see here, and you're going to think, why would I ever use something like that? I guarantee there's a place for it. There's some place where you would be using some of the advanced tools that we have in the routed world to make it more efficient. So if you're ready, I'm ready. Let's get going into the BSCI world. Giddy up.